Modern Europe. European War. Number one, objectives. To understand the major political, economic ideologies and movements shaping Europe before the Great War. Second, analyze the relationship between these major political economic movements and subsequent conflicts during the period, including the Great War and then World War II. And then thirdly, assess the legacy of these movements from a historical perspective. And so, we understand the major political economic ideologies and the movements shaping Europe before World War I. And these are the following: colonialism, nationalism, communism, and anti-Semitism. It is hard to overstate just how critically important these ideological movements were in shaping Europe at that time and how they affected conflict in World War I and World War II. Concerning ideologies, they have power, they have influence, and they have activity. These ideologies did not disappear after the 1860 to 1960 era of European history. They remain a legacy of Europe and how the world at large views Europe in today's time. Whether rightly or wrongly, that is a philosophical question. The first stop is colonialism. A definition of colonialism from Collins English Dictionary, and it defines colonialism as, quote, the policy and practice of a power in extending control over weaker people or areas, end quote. Okay, second, we talk about economics. Access to raw materials, markets, and trade routes. Third, military. Access to area, control of sea lanes and trade routes, power projection military, such as the Navy. The British had the largest Navy during the world around 1944, I believe, or it might have been 1939. The British Royal Navy was immaculate, and so they would be in charge of resupply and logistics bases as well. So another thing is strategic advantage and balance of power, both domestically and regionally in Europe. And of course, the power, industrial, technological, military, and economic, was in the hands of the Europeans, extending their power to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So, looking at this from an ethical standpoint, which philosophy covers, using power to control others was not just an issue in European history, but also in other areas like Asia and Africa of ancient and modern times. Historically, these societies extended their powers locally within their own lands. Again, Old World Europe extended its powers over into the Third World lands, just as it had done to the New World. Now, it is important to understand that European countries, such as England, France, the Dutch, later Italians and Germans being a part of this ideology in action, gained much from this ideology, both domestically helped their standard of living and progress in their own countries, and of course foreign as well, their ability to project power in Europe. Colonialism is still brought up today in ethical and human rights issues that are brought up in today's modern contemporary world, in journalism, and also in historical accounts. Many countries of the world today consider Europe to still be colonial in the sense that it still seeks to exploit other third world countries and set up favorable economic arrangements. And so, as we have covered the first ideology, that of colonialism, we needed to know that at certain points of time, for example, Africa was controlled by many different countries, countries that were not that were separated by seas. So, anyways, this is the video on colonialism. Now we will discuss next nationalism. All right, so I give the definition. The Columbia Encyclopedia, the 6th edition, says, quote, a political or social philosophy in which the welfare of the nation state as an entity is considered paramount, end quote. This ideology was critically important for the political movements of Europe. A very strong sense of loyalty to a people with a shared heritage, history, language, and culture, in contrast to loyalty to a king. Again, the rise of nationalism gave rise to states being born and the assertion of the power of said states. And of course, at this time, in the middle of the 20th century, after World War I, we start to develop the idea historically of a nation state. And of course, again, a strong sense of loyalty to a people with a shared heritage, history, language, and culture, in contrast to loyalty to a king. And so now we are starting to say a farewell to the kings. In and of itself, it is by definition similar to the term patriotism, since it is being supportive of one's country. Exclusionary, racist, and militaristic. The word nationalism becomes probabilistic and problematic when this ideology becomes exclusionary, racist, or militaristic. Encouragers during the time period of modern Europe. For example, Serbian nationalists, a critical group in the outbreak of World War I, who were willing to use assassination and revolutionary ideas mixed with violence in order to spread its view of nationalism. And as you know, World War I started because of the assassination primarily of Ferdinand. Now, communism. Next stop, communism, extraordinary in its importance, however. Definition, more than an economic philosophy, from that of Karl Marx to Joseph Stalin. There needs to be a transcendence above the economic and just assured political philosophy of communism. Economically, it is a command economy that seeks to control its means of production, and even in some sense, the means of consumption. Let's be honest. Politically, communism is violent, and at its core, it can be revolutionary. It rejects only or any kind of social or gradual change. And so particularly the Russian Revolution, for example, was when communism became more than just an ideology of the 19th century that was articulated by Karl Marx and Joseph Engels, more than just communities expanded around the globe in countries that are proclaiming revolution. And again, communism has transformed since then. Apologize about the mispronunciation there. Now, communism has transformed from a mere ideology and political community in groups and small revolutions breaking out here and there to a very successful revolution that has now conquered state power. In other words, has actually become a state power with its conquest of Russia, which became the Soviet Union. This is extremely important in this regard. All the technology, all the leadership, the resources of the Soviet Union, all the energy of the large population, all her demographics and borders is now at the control of a communist ideology that changes the very potency of its nature and the lethality thereof that affects Europe. Communism was truly an extraordinary political movement of its time, completely ruthless, its ethics born out of pure pragmatism. Lenin, for example, said, quote, ethics are shaped by the needs of the communist movements, not by any moral standard, end quote. Communism had a tendency to influence even when it transformed from an ideology to a state power, in modern Europe and in societal circles even today in contemporary times. The last stop is anti Semitism or Zionism. They're two different things, though. So, for historical occurrences of anti Semitism in Europe, this against Semites ideology was widespread throughout Europe. There were many violent outbreaks occurring in order to expel Jews in particular from the area, including others as well. This happened in hundreds, even thousands of places all across of Europe because its power lurked in the thinking of individuals all across of Europe. As a reaction to these violent expulsions, the Jews became much more isolated, unified, and galvanized, particularly through the leadership of Theodor Herzl, who called for cultural unity of the Jewish people and gave it a clear vision by arguing that these people, our people, he said, must return to the area of Palestine. Before this, there were many differing views on how to solve the problem of anti-Semitism. However, as the Jews became more organized and political in their power, the reaction to them increased, particularly anti-Semitism became an important aspect within Nazi ideology and the Nuremberg laws, for example, and the Holocaust. The major extermination of the entire race during that time period. There were like 4 million Jews and 7 total or something like that. Mao Zedong killed more. Alright, so colonial nationalism, communism, and anti-Semitism were powerful political, economical, social movements of early 20th century Europe. These movements shaped the actual behavior of individuals in Europe and significantly contributed to the unrest, conflict, and warfare of modern Europe in the early and mid-20th century. Now, World War I and World War II were conflicts that occurred because of the economic and colonial rivalry that occurred among the Europeans, and that was clearly seen in North Africa, where German and Italian forces were actively trying to sweep British forces out of the area. And so the legacy of these ideologies color, in a sense, the very history and perception of Europe in today's world, and therefore should be taken seriously as being this potent in their influential force.